Several Democratic lawmakers have unveiled a plan to cancel thousands of dollars in student loan debt for borrowers. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senator Elizabeth Warren were among those urging President Biden to forgive $50,000 in federal student loans. Warren says the measure would cost about $650 billion and would help boost the nation's struggling economy during the coronavirus pandemic. The Biden administration has made tackling the student debt crisis a top priority and has already extended a pause on loan payments through September. CBS News reporter Kate Smith joins me now for more. Kate, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, more than 40 million Americans had nearly $1.6 trillion of federal student loan debt in 2020. Roughly how many Americans would actually benefit from this proposal?
So, Lana, nearly every borrower of student loan debt would benefit from this proposal, and that's because the vast majority of student loan debt is federal student loans. That's over 90%. So virtually every single person who has federal student loans would benefit from this proposal. Now, the reason for that is that previous proposals have made income caps or, occupational caveats, but this one is a blanket proposal. So virtually everyone would be benefited, and the time is right. Student loan debt was a crisis long before the pandemic, but the pandemic really has exaggerated so many of the issues that student loan debt has created. Now, to put this in perspective, $40 trillion sounds like a lot of money, but thinking about the individual, the average person who has student loan debt owes about $200 or $300 every single month. And Lana, for many of those people, it's just untenable. So about 1 in 6 are actually in default of those loans.
Well, so why not focus on the people for whom this student loan debt is crushing? I'm surprised when you're saying, Kate, that there's no income caps. If somebody is leaving college with $50,000 in student loans, but they're making, coming right out of college, $500,000, should we taxpayers be subsidizing that?
So that's a very interesting question, and I think it's one of the basis of why it's been difficult to find bipartisan support for student loan cancellation, because there are so many caveats. And exactly that example that you say, why should someone who's making $500,000 get some sort of taxpayer subsidized relief on their student loan debt? But what you're seeing today, and the proposal that was put forward today, it's important to note it's not binding. It's simply telling the Biden administration what to do via executive action. So there isn't any binding nature to it. And what a lot of policymakers in D.C. have said today is, think of this more as kind of the Democrats, and especially progressive Democrats, their first step towards kind of edging the Biden administration towards handling student loan cancellation. Now, on day one, like you mentioned, the Biden administration did pause, I should say, student loan payments per month. That was an extension of a nearly year-long coronavirus initiative that started back in March. But they haven't said anything about student loan cancellation. And Biden is one of the more moderate politicians on this. He's long said that he supports $10,000 of student loan cancellation per borrower. And he only wants to do that via congressional action, which, would imply some sort of level of bipartisan support. So, when I was talking to some people in D.C., what they were telling me is, think of this less as a binding proposal and more of kind of a starting point of where Democrats want to go and what they want to see when it comes to student debt cancellation with this administration.
So, Kate, to follow up on that, because as you mentioned, out on the campaign trail, President Biden was backing a plan to forgive up to $10,000 in student loans via congressional action. And we're now talking about a different amount, 5 times that, and potentially even a different path. Some congressional leaders actually urging that President Biden do it through executive action as opposed to Congress passing legislation. So what is the White House saying about this new resolution and this new amount?
So at first they said nothing, but we saw a tweet from the press secretary, and Len, if I can read it to you, what she said is that our team is reviewing whether there are any steps he can take through executive action. And again, she did reiterate that the president does support, again, $10,000, not $50,000, $10,000 of student debt cancellation via congressional action. She said he would be pleased to sign a bill that Congress can sign. So what you're seeing is the White House, we expected a chilly reception to this. This is virtually the opposite opposite of what the Biden administration said on the campaign trail, what they'd like to support. But the reception isn't as chilly as you might have expected. It sounds like they're open to at least looking at it and, talking with some of these progressive Democrats.
Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts said that the student debt crisis is both a racial and economic justice issue. And we know that the statistics bear that out. Can you tell us, Kate, a little bit more about how people of color specifically are impacted by this crushing student loan debt?
That's exactly right, Lana. And one of the ways in which this proposal today was framed was that of not necessarily an economic issue, but this is a civil rights issue. And that is what you saw senators and representatives saying today during that press conference. And the way they explained it is that, although all students, tend to borrow when they go to college, students of color, they're more likely to borrow. They're more likely to borrow more, and they're more likely to have trouble repaying that debt. And to step further, they are more likely to default on that debt. And why that's an issue, and just to make it understanding to our viewers of why that's such a problem, is that student loan debt is one of the most difficult types of debt to be able to negotiate, to get out of. It's not like credit card debt. It's a very different kind of debt. It's very strict. And so if you are, I believe, 270 days late on a student loan payment, you are technically in default. What does default mean? It means that your credit report is going to get dinged. And why that's so important, and especially for students who go to college, they're entering the workforce, they're beginning their adult lives. That is the difference between being able to, say, get a mortgage, start your family, being able to get a car payment. It's all of these milestones that we think of when we think of adulthood, especially young adulthood. And because of these high default rates that you see in communities of color when it comes to student loan debt, they're often prohibited from doing those things that allows them to progress into their adulthood and be successful in their careers. And then ultimately, the irony of all of this is to pay off those student debts, right? So you kind of see a full circle when it comes to how the student debt really impacts communities of color.
Yeah, and we do also know that credit card debt can be equally crushing, but in some cases, and like you said, missing a payment 1 month on credit card debt can also ding your credit status and your credit worthiness. It's all such a vicious cycle. So, Kate, you mentioned early on that 90% of people who have student loan debt have federal student loans. But what about those with private loans? And what about so many people who have both federal student loans and private loans?
So unfortunately, this proposal, Lana, would only apply to those who have federal student loan debt. But like we note, that is 90% of student loan borrowers do fall into that category. And the reason why the government's able to get involved with federal student loan debt is because the U.S. Department of Education, they are the ones that are behind that debt. So that's why they have the control and why they're able to do anything about federal student loan debt, whereas there's much less control, there's much less, hands-on ability to solve any of those issues from a government perspective when it comes to those private loans. But again, you are dealing with the most number of student debt borrowers, since so many, the vast majority of borrowers are those of federal student loan debt.
All right, Kate, thank you.